I'd like to introduce on stage Janice Long. Thank you.
I presume this is my microphone. Hello and welcome. What a gorgeous hall this is. It's like a wedding cake, and apparently it was meant to look like a wedding cake. I've just been stroking the pillars. Also catching up with the man you're here to see tonight, alongside Trademark, who you'll be meeting later. I went to see the exhibition this afternoon, This Way Out, at the fabulous Camp and Furnace, and thoroughly enjoyed wandering around there. He's looking wonderful. His new album, I honestly think it's the best thing he's done. His voice just sounds tremendous on it, This Way Out. Will you please give a warm Liverpool welcome to Boy George. One more.
Always one more.
Thanks very much. You're there, I'm here. And that's yours. Where's Holly? Hiya. You're right. Yes, that's your microphone.
Hello.
As I said, looking absolutely brilliant. But this album, This Way Out, I mean, you are on fine form. Your voice.
This is what I do.
This is what I do. Yeah, exactly. I did say that before. And it's getting a huge response. Your live appearances and the album going down extremely well, which obviously must thrill you.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think kind of having a break from making music was probably quite a good thing. I mean, it was quite a long break. I mean, I've been DJing, so that's music as well, but it's different. It's kind of almost like a parallel universe DJing. You know, you can kind of do that, and unless you go clubbing, no one really knows what you're doing. So people were constantly asking me, "What do you do now?" Can't be bothered to explain, but yeah, that's been an amazing kind of second career for me for the last 20 years, and I've loved it. But you know, I don't know. A couple of years ago, I just started to kind of think about making a new record, and you know, making a record that sort of represented me at sort of past 50. You know, and it was quite nice to kind of make a record. You know, I've made the record myself, put it out on my own label. I wasn't making it for any record company, so there was no real pressure. And I don't think, you know, anyone really had any particular expectations. It was like, you know, I could just do what I want, and that's what I did.
But you actually changed quite a lot of things. You got a new manager in Jazz Summers. And I wonder, because I know Jazz, and he's macrobiotic, and he loves his Buddhism and his chanting and what have you. And you've embraced all of that, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, Jazz I've known for years, and, you know, through food, funnily enough, because he was macrobiotic, and I knew people that cooked for him and blah, 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 and I'd met him in restaurants. And then I was invited once to come and stay at some hotel he had in France where it was macrobiotic. But anyway, it never happened. But when I was looking for a manager last year, a friend of mine said Jazz Summers, and I was like, Jazz? And then it kind of made sense, really, because he's quite bonkers. And I thought he'd be the only person, really, that would be able to kind of take me on and sort of deal with me now, really. And, you know, I think, you know, when you've had a kind of very successful career, like the career with Culture Club, you know, and you work with certain people, it's quite hard sometimes for people to kind of think of you as anything else but that, you know. And as I said to you earlier, I wasn't even that at the time. You know?
But isn't it also difficult that, you know, people have a perception of you? So Jazz is going to have that perception. He's seen you over the years, and he can kind of assume a career track for you that you might not necessarily want to go along.
Not at all. And I did sit down with him very early on and say, forget everything you think you know about me. And he said, oh, no. I said, no, I can just tell from talking to you that you've got some kind of preconceptions. And, you know, I really wanted to work with somebody that, you know, I have respect for my past, but, you know, to wallow in it is not something that interests me, you know. And also, you know, it doesn't really matter now what you've done before. It kind of doesn't really make any difference. It's what you do now that really matters. You know, it's great to say, oh, yeah, I did all that stuff, but You know what I mean? In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't mean much, you know.
Thing is that people always remember your history. I mean, interestingly enough, just coming here today or yesterday, people saying, what are you going to be doing in Liverpool? Boy George. And everybody on the planet seems to know Boy George, but nobody has a bad word to
they
say
do
about...
on Twitter.
No,
They do.
Well, not out of the 5 people I spoke to.
I think, you know, obviously people have always been really nice to me, and I really appreciate that, but there are people out there who really don't like me, and I find them quite fascinating. You know, when you go and, you know, you do interviews in magazines, and then you go online and you look at the comments underneath, and you think, oh, really? You know, it's quite shocking, the things people say. But people, when they meet you in the street, are lovely, so you can get a false impression of what humanity is like, you know?
That's the thing not to do, though, isn't it? Is if you go online, don't go to the bit where they're going to comment, or don't Google yourself.
The trouble is, I can't resist, kind of. And you know, often I do find some of the nasty things that are written about me quite funny. I mean, you know, there have been people on Twitter who've insulted me, and I've ended up following them because their insults were quite funny. And I think if you're witty and you can say something amusing, that's okay. It's just when it's kind of mindless, sort of, you know, school playground kind of stuff that, you know.
But can you imagine if Twitter had been around sort of 20 years ago?
I said, you know, the feuds that I could have had back then with people would have just been ridiculous. It would have just been relentless. I'm kind of glad that, you know, that things like social networking weren't around in the 80s, because it would have got in the way, and there was enough things getting in the way. You know what I mean? It didn't really need that on top of everything else. But and I also kind of like the fact that there's a lot of stuff, you know, because nowadays everything you do is filmed, you know, and that's awful. But imagine if there'd been kind of camera phones around at that time. It would just be, you just never want to go out, would you? You're just like, oh no.
So getting back to the album, This Is What I Do. And I said to you, is there going to be another single? And of course, times have changed now. You don't release singles anymore, do you? It's a focus track.
Adult artists like us, it's called a focus track. I just found this word out. I love it. It's like, oh, okay, that's what it is. Because people were saying, oh, when's the single out? I was like, well, that doesn't really apply to people of my age, because there's a kind of, I don't know what the actual age limit is in this country, but there's a certain point. Apparently the Sugar Babes are too old for Radio 1. That happened to me like 25 years ago. I was one of the first. But there's a point where you sort of get too old for kind of commercial radio. And, you know, I'm obviously well past that point. And so singles are now called focus tracks. So we don't actually release them as singles. They're just to draw you towards
just to highlight, aren't they, and draw, yeah.
Yeah.
And so the next one will be My God.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a fantastic track as well. And for those of you who haven't heard the album, but hopefully everybody has, there's a real mix of styles on there. There's a country sound. You love your reggae. That's there.
Yeah, I do love my reggae. I just think the record is like all of the things I loved in the 70s. I think of it as quite 70s flavoured, and all the things that I loved growing up, reggae, punk, you know, Bowie, Mark Bolan, all of those things. Even a bit of electro, all of that stuff is just thrown in there, you know, and it kind of works.
Those influences, where do you think the first influence came from? Where was it, or where, you know, when was it where you actually thought, my God, this is inspiring me to go in that direction?
Well, obviously the most obvious one was David Bowie, but there were things before that kind of had an influence on me, because my dad was a builder. My dad used to clear out houses when people either died or they'd done a moonlight flit or whatever, and he'd always come back with piles of records. And in those piles of records, there were all sorts of things from, you know, Can to kind of Bessie Smith to, you know, Pearl Bailey, lots of jazz records. So I discovered a lot of jazz very, very early on, like 10 or 11. And then later on, I discovered that Mark Bolan was obsessed with Bessie Smith and apparently got his vibrato from playing a Bessie Smith record at the wrong speed. And there was a lot of vibrato at the normal speed, but apparently he was playing it at the wrong speed, and that's how he got that kind of, yeah, you know. And just, you know, when you're a kid and you love music, you know, there is no, I mean, as we get older, we all tend to be really cool and say, oh, yeah, I only like this and I only like that. But when I was like 10, I liked everything. My first record I bought was Alexander Beatle by Melanie. I don't know if anyone knows that record.
I love that.
I bought that. It's like one of my first purchases. And then things like Yellow River by Christie. I loved that record. So, obviously as you get older, you get a bit more like, oh, I didn't like that and I didn't like this. But when I was a kid, I liked everything, Irish show band tunes, all of it. I loved it all.
You say that, but I think it's quite interesting. Kids now, because of technology, they do dip into all kinds of different things. When I was a kid, it would be like, you're into prog rock or you're into this. Whereas now, you can listen to a kid in the bedroom playing drum and bass or, really quite heavy hip-hop and then be listening to something that they've heard off an advert. It might be Simon and Garfunkel or some Dylan or whatever.
Yeah, I think we were like that. I mean, I remember being just open to anything. I'd go to the local record shop, and if an album sleeve looked interesting, I'd want to hear it. I'd kind of be drawn to a picture, or one of my friends might tell me about something. But a lot of it was just instinctual. You were drawn to things, but also through Bowie, I discovered things like Lou Reed, Bob Dylan, because Bowie wrote about Bob Dylan on Hunky Dory. So who's this guy? So a lot of things were passed on through the things that we loved as kids, and I had an older brother who, had his own bedroom, and that was like a temple of cool, and there'd often be like new records, Alice Cooper coming through the walls, or Man Who Sold the World, or whatever it may be, Rod Stewart, Early Faces. So I got a lot of my musical influences from my older brother, and also lots of his kind of secondhand Chelsea Girl unisex T-shirts.
You mentioned Lou Reed, and sadly, he shuffled off this mortal coil just a couple of weeks ago, and you have paid tribute to him in your live set.
Yeah, I've been doing a version of Satellite of Love, and I saw Lou Reed when I was 14 at Charlton Football Ground with The Who.
Wow.
So that was a moment for me, obviously. I only went to see Lou Reed. I didn't even know who The Who were, which is terrible, really. I love them now, but I literally just went for Lou Reed, and yeah, and I met Lou Reed about 4 years ago. Well, I say I met him, I got a wink.
Did you?
Sorry,
what was that?
A wink, a wink. I was at Anthony and the Johnsons concert, and he was friends with Anthony, and he was happy to be sitting next to me, and I was very excited. But I, sort of didn't want to bother him, and at one point he kind of did look at me anyway, gave me a little wink.
And there's the similarity in that you both, not go way out of your way to do it, but you just naturally break the rules.
Yeah, I don't think of myself, I don't know, it's hard to say that about myself, really, because for me, I don't know if anyone growing up in the 70s, those kind of people were, I think people that were famous in the 70s are kind of special, even to people like me who've been famous. I still think of people like Lou Reed and Bowie, and I met Patti Smith a couple of weeks ago in New York, which was really exciting. Yeah. And to me, they're kind of, I don't know, they're just different. They're different kind of stars. And, I don't think of myself like that.
Is that because they were the first?
Well, I suppose, when you discover people, when you're very young and, it's a formidable time and, you're learning stuff and discovering new things and you're young, I think it just has a big impact on you. And there are some things that I kind of loved in the 70s that, I still get excited about now, You
mentioned Bowie, you mentioned Lou Reed, you mentioned Mark Bolan, and they are people who, sexuality was very open. They discussed it. They wrote, the lyrics and what have you. They pushed it. Was that?
I'm not sure if it was that open. I think it was. I don't know. I think it was like to us, because I think we didn't have the information age, so there was less. You used to hear stories. I remember once hearing a story that Mark Bolan and Mickey Finn were lovers, and there was this fantastic picture of them in the Birmingham Evening Post. I was staying with my grandmother, and it was like they were really made up, and it was a really great picture. And I remember at school hearing, things like, oh, they're boyfriends, and and you'd hear about kind of Bowie allegedly kind of being in bed with Mick Jagger, but I don't think any of it was really true. Do you? I don't know. I think it was all just kind of mythical stuff.
No, but I think there was...
We wanted it to be true.
Yeah,
I think we wanted it to be true.
It.
And I think in a way, it was kind of more interesting when you didn't know. It's I think for me, one of the funny things about kind of being an out public person is that, when you are in the closet, everyone says, oh, come out, And then when you do, everyone just says, oh, all you do is go on about being gay. You can't win, So I think in a way, those kind of 70s pop stars, they had it all because they had the kind of mystery and you didn't really know. And I think sometimes that's more interesting, really.
actually just going back to Lou Reed, because I'm thinking about Helen Terry actually, and the connection there. Did you ever, think that you were going to work with her at some point?
The first time I met Helen was outside a nightclub in London, and she was performing with this group called the Neo-Naturists. They were these sort of people that used to strip off and cover themselves in butter and mud and put twigs in their hair. And somebody said, "Oh, she's a really good singer," and then, sort of give me a bit of a history. And I said, "Oh, go on then, sing." And she looked at me, she goes, "I'm not a seal." Of course, I fell in love with her then, and sort of managed to coax her into being part of Culture Club. But, and she was, for me, one of the most important kind of assets that we had, really. Her the way that she layered vocals, and, she was a big influence on us, musically.
Well, I mean, that Church of the Poisoned Mind, that soaring thing that she does with her voice.
Yeah, I mean, just a very kind of, everybody, wherever I go in the world, people always ask me about Helen. People always, the two people they always ask me about are Helen Terry and Marilyn.
Oh, really?
Wherever I go, it's like, how's Marilyn? It's interesting.
How is Marilyn?
He's fine. But, it's so, I can be in the most remote place and people say, how's Marilyn? He really seemed to kind of have an effect on people, And plus, because he sort of disappeared for years, he's a bit sort of like Greta Garbo or something, It's kind
so what's he doing?
He last time I spoke to him, he was at drama college, which I thought you don't really need any help with that. But apparently he's been doing drama, yeah.
Something I've always been envious of course, is the days of the Blitz Club. And never ever, had the opportunity to go there. I was up here, but used to read about it. And of course, that wonderful drama they did. Was it on BBC One?
Yeah, Worried About the Boy, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was brilliant. Just take us through briefly. I know you've gone on, so much about it, but...
It was a really small pinhead of a scene.
Tiny.
With a bunch of very self-obsessed people. There wasn't that many of them. But there was also scenes up here in Liverpool.
Yes,
one of the interesting things about that period in sort of late 70s was I was living briefly in Warsaw with a guy called Martin Degville, who was in ZZ Sputnik. Martin is kind of quite important in the kind of realm of freakdom, because I met Martin when I was a punk. And I was in Bournemouth, and I just saw this thing across the road with high heels on, massive white quiff, huge shoulder. I mean, just amazing kind of makeup. And of course, went straight up to him and made him my new best friend, and ended up kind of moving to Birmingham or to Warsaw to live with him and a bunch of people in a disused dental studio. But we knew about the scene in Liverpool. We knew about Pete Burns, we knew about Jane Casey, Holly, people like that. We knew about those people, and there was fanzines, but we didn't have any of the social networking. But people knew about other people, and in fact, I always wanted to go to Liverpool. But I was frightened I was going to get beat up. It was like, don't go to Liverpool like that, because back then, people were really territorial about their eyebrows. If you turned up in Liverpool with crimped hair and Pete Burns crimped hair, you're going to get duffed up. It was that serious, So it was an interesting time because we all knew about each other. But it was like, don't go to Liverpool. You have to be really brave. You have to be like, Courtney Love to go to Liverpool at that point. But we always wanted to go. It was hilarious. And then, of course, a few years later, when I'd started the band, I encountered Pete Burns in a London nightclub, and it was quite a scary experience for me. It was like, basically, I was on the staircase of this club, and I had a yellow face, and he had a yellow face. It was like, and he was with his wife Lynn and the drummer, I think, and and I loved the way they looked. It was a funny situation. I really wanted to meet him, but I'd heard he was really scary, and he was going to kill me. So I came face to face with him, and he's like, "You ripped off my look." Sorry, it's a really bad Liverpool accent. And I was like, what? Anyway, we didn't hit each other, and for years we used to be really vile to each other. But actually now, I always loved him then, but now we're pretty good mates. But it was quite funny. But back then, people would literally attack you if you did something that was vaguely similar. So that's what the Blitz was like. I'm sure it was like that up here as well, I don't know.
But isn't it interesting that Pete Burns and you had a similar look, and yet there was no social networking, there were no pictures being tweeted or anything?
I think once you sort of tie a ribbon in your hair, you put it into the ether, it's like it no longer belongs to you. And I think back then, there was a lot of that, because we were all most of us were unemployed, we were all living on nothing. And so everything that you did visually was really threadbare, only the really lucky people kind of got to buy kind of seditionaries clothes or, to shop in the boutiques. Everything we did was like Oxfam, get a pair of scissors out, cut it up, sew an extra arm on the jacket,
So you must have been made up when you suddenly get a deal and you can afford to go and buy whatever you want.
Well, back then
Or was it less exciting then?
No, I used to get everything made. I had, Sue Clowes, and then I had this guy called Dexter Wong who made stuff for me. And I suppose at that point I was terrified of, arriving anywhere in the same outfit as anyone else, So I'd never have gone to, designer stuff came later. I did eventually get there, but I used to avoid, because Duran Duran wore Anthony Price, and they were very designer, so we really used to try and make our own stuff. The rest of my band hated the fact that we had costumes made. They all wanted to wear shoulder pads and all of that, but I wouldn't allow it. I was such a.
So it looked like
Spandau
Spandau Ballet.
They would have loved that, They would have loved it. I stopped it, I made them. I wouldn't let them.
They're very exciting times, though. Do you look back with affection, or?
I mean, I prefer now. I have to say,
I can't help. I find it unusual. There's a big obsession with the 80s at the moment.
Oh no, it's great. It's good for business. It's always good to have a renaissance. But I think for me, because I DJ, I don't have to kind of visit it very often, and so I kind of have a slightly affectionate relationship with the 80s. For most of it, I think, I was just working non-stop, and I just didn't ever really stop to think about what was going on, and it was only really after. And now, when you look back and think, my God, all the things I did, all the places I went to, and I didn't even notice.
And also, forgive me, but, the stuff that you were doing as well, there'd be a lot of stuff you can't remember.
You mean drugs?
I did say something to you before, and I went, I don't remember that, and I went, no, you probably wouldn't.
Janice was telling me something quite formidable about her past, and I was like, vaguely remember that. But truth be known, at that point in my life, I was full of my own self-importance. And, even nowadays, I think much more about the effect I have with the things I do, probably because I practice Buddhism, and that's a big part of it. But back then, we were just doing we were just being ourselves, and having a hoot doing it. We weren't really, I have to be honest and say, I wasn't really thinking about the social impact. I was just kind of getting away with it and, just doing my thing. Nowadays, I tend to think more about, God, the effect it had on people, because when you travel the world, you meet people who say, oh my God, you're the reason I became a lesbian, or I had a sex change. Really, that's quite a common thing for me, and I'm actually really proud of that. I think it's great, the fact that, there are people around the world living in places where, like, for example, where I couldn't go in the 80s. I couldn't go to Argentina or Russia. There was a load of countries that wouldn't let me in, just because of the way I looked. So the fact that, there were people there that kind of found some kind of hope in just, the fact that we were doing what we were doing was, I think, amazing, and I'm very, very proud of that.
And also countries that wouldn't let you in because of what you'd done, but you've managed to get back into the States.
Fast forward. There's been a couple of times when I haven't been allowed into America. Currently I've just been in America for 6 weeks, which was amazing. I loved it. I've forgotten how much I love America, that kind of positivity. I mean, English cynicism is brilliant, and it's always good to come back and, to hear and also be part of that. But I think there's something really great about America, that, anything's possible, and, people are just a bit more kind of up for, things working. In England, people say, oh, that's never going to work. Whereas in America, they'll say, let's have a meeting, at least. And I quite like that, I quite like a bit of that.
Well, I know you met up with Roy, didn't you, in the States? We'll talk about that later, actually, because I want to bring on stage now Mark Wardell, otherwise known as Trademark. Are you there?
Or
Please
Trade
come through.
to his friends. Have you got a chair?
I hope he's got a chair.
Has he got a chair? Are you going to stand, Mark?
Is he there? Never mind, we can carry on
I think you
talking
should go
until
in the
Mark
middle.
makes...
Hello,
Oh,
look
there
at
you
you.
are. Welcome, welcome, Trademark. And yes, Mark Wardell, Trademark, and with George has the exhibition up at the Camp and Furnace this way out. And if you haven't been to see it, please do, because it ends, when does it end? 25th of November. Good to see you, and local lad.
Yes,
Yes.
local lad.
Tell us about your childhood.
Well, I grew up in New Brighton when in the days of the Tower and the Pier and all of that.
So the ballroom hadn't burnt down at that point,
No,
or
it hadn't burnt down, no. So it was a great place to be when you were a kid.
donkeys and everything. It was a proper seaside resort.
Yeah, it really was. So, I grew up then and had summer jobs on the Pier and in the Golden Goose Arcade and all of that. So it was a great place to be as a kid. And we were just talking before, we must have walked past each
We
other.
reckon we've passed each other on the prom many times when we were about 5 or 6. Stick a rock in the hand, pleading to go on the bumpers or whatever. At what point did you realise you were arty and wanted to go to art college?
I think I was always arty. I mean, I was always drawing when I was a kid. I think I spent a lot of time creating fantasy worlds really through drawing. So it was something that I always did. There was no case of making a decision about it or anything like that. It was just a natural progression really. So when I left school, that was it. A few friends of mine from school went to art school as well. So I joined them, and that was...
And did you relate it to music at that particular time as well?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think George and I are both similar in that we're the generation that really were affected by David Bowie when he came out in the early 70s. But music always played a large part. I mean, working on the Pier and in New Brighton, there was a great place to hear. You'd hear like Grooving with Mr. Blow and all that kind of thing, Honky Tonk Women by the Stones. So music has always been there and always kind of associated it with visuals. I've always associated it with visuals as well as the sound.
And at what point did you move to London? Because I know you did. You decided that, did you think it was all paved with gold, or that was the place to be in terms of art, not Wallasey?
Well, the thing is, things were very different in those days, and it was pre-computers and all of that kind of thing. And really, there was kind of a situation that if you were hankering after a life of panache and glamour, as espoused by the likes of Roxy Music and David Bowie, it wasn't really going to happen in New Brighton. You had to kind of...
You could have made it happen.
I could have, well, we're rectifying it now, so it was kind of, there was a thing in those days, you kind of felt you had to go to London if you wanted to be involved in something outside of the kind of mainstream society. So when I finished art school, I went down to London with my portfolio, walked into a couple of Soho advertising agencies and got a job as a junior illustrator straight away. I mean, you couldn't do that now. I mean, you'd stand no chance.
But also,
So,
even
really
in London, if you lived in the suburbs, you went to the centre.
Yeah,
Didn't
You
you?
didn't stay in Eltham. You went to the bright lights of Soho. So it's the same thing, just on a bigger scale, really,
Yeah.
isn't it?
And in fact,
Absolutely.
that's changed Soho in many ways. When you look at Soho now, how different... I mean, I liked the old Soho,
yeah,
to be
I
honest
did.
with you.
Yeah.
But, what's happened now, it's lured in all of those arty, graphic, what have you, places.
But it's become a bit bland, isn't
I
it?
think
It's
so.
all brand. It's like all branding and luxury brands and
Yep.
all of the kind of character. And I mean, my personal bugbear is that all the little original cafes and things are being forced out by chains and stuff like
Well, that's
that.
happening everywhere, isn't it? Individuality is just being squeezed out
Not in my
all of
house.
the time.
Or mine.
And in fact, I think it's something like, I think today or tomorrow is Fight for the Individual Shops Day or whatever, so everybody should be doing that. When did you two meet? Was it As a
Did I
club?
meet you or did you meet me? I don't know.
I think we met each other. It was at the Blitz club, actually. I mean, when
See?
when I moved to London, I gravitated towards clubs like the Blitz, and there was places called Legends and things like that. And I remember seeing George, who was kind of one of the kind of standout people at the Blitz, and he just looked so incredible that there was no way, being an artist, you couldn't, because I'm kind of obsessed with the human face and strong makeup and looks and exaggerated characters and things. So, I mean, George was the perfect subject, and in fact, he was the first real-life person that I actually did a portrait of. And that's
I thought that was very glamorous to be painted, because I wasn't famous, but it made me feel quite famous. And my brother had this painting that Mark did above his fireplace in Woolwich. For years, it got destroyed, but I was very excited to be painted. I was like, oh.
Well, so are loads of people, Kylie, all kinds of people talk about you and love, you know, the whole process and love owning it as well, saying, I've never looked so gorgeous in my life.
Yeah, I mean, well, we were talking about this before. I mean, I'm not a sort of warts and all painter, you know. There's never a wrinkle or a spot or anything.
How much do you charge?
I'll tell you afterwards.
I think it's the same with when I do photography. I'm not interested in kind of reality. You know, we live in a world where there's so much of that anyway. You know, and I think it's nice to kind of mess around with that and kind of make people look how they imagine themselves to look. You know, I love Polaroids. You know, Polaroids was such a great thing. Just lips, eyes, eyebrows. Yeah. Slight bit of nose. I mean, I just think that kind of whole period in the 70s, the way that people took pictures, it was just so glamorous. And also Hollywood as well. And I just think there's so much reality now. It's almost like, it repels me. I just kind of want to make people look more and more
it's too much.
Dreamlike.
How long have you been doing all of your photographs then? It's been quite some time.
I always carried a camera, and back in the day, I took some amazing pictures of people, which somewhere in my house, there are kind of negatives of all these kind of people when I was in New York, that I took photos of and situations. And, some of them I kept, but that was more sort of just, being excited about kind of traveling and, bumping into Diana Ross and quick, take a picture, And then I sort of, when I was living in New York, I started making clothes for my Be Rude label. And, I got into this kind of narcissistic idea of kind of having models wearing their own faces and pictures of themselves on their clothes, and of course I love beautiful boys, so it was a kind of double whammy to kind of create things and then get some beautiful boy to kind of come and pose in it, and just playing around with the whole kind of self-obsession thing. I find that quite fascinating.
And that's kind of the underlying thing in our show, isn't it? The exhibition that we've done. It's people creating their own exaggerated personas, people that were living outside of mainstream society that couldn't maybe function on a day-to-day basis in the real world. So they were taking the lead from the likes of Bowie, who said you don't necessarily have to be who society has conditioned you to be. You can be who you want, you can look how you want. So there was a whole circle of people who created their own exaggerated personas and lived out in clubs like the Blitz, which was kind of like an arena, wasn't it? It was like.
But the other thing as well is that you could kind of survive. I don't know whether you can now. I do have friends, young friends, who tend to kind of do what we were doing back then. But I just think it was easier in some ways in the sort of 70s to sort of not work and somehow carve out a sort of avant-garde existence, on a shoestring, I mean, I always used to go home, I lived in squats, but I'd always go home to my parents and get food. I sort of raid the freezer and take all food back. But, I just think, when I look back at like Mark was talking about how he walked into a graphics place, I, got myself jobs doing windows and working in shops and just really through being gobby. Just saying, I can do that, even though I'd never done it before. And I think, in a way, it was more naive. I think nowadays, you'd need a resume to do anything, don't you?
Yeah, you can't. And then you'd have to go and be an intern and not be paid.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Well, I would have done that as well. I just was for me, around that point, you know, obviously it was easier to sign on then as well. That was the other thing. They didn't keep trying to send you for jobs. But also, but the other thing was that, you know, the way that we looked, you was never going to get a job. You know, I mean, the amount of jobs that I, you know, used to kind of try and tone it down and sort of flatten the hair and try and look, you know, look like I had eyebrows, you know, and I'd sort of go off to these jobs and they'd be like, yeah, we'll let you know. And, you know, it was just easy not to get employed because no one was going to give you a job looking like that, you know, which is never going to happen, you know.
Thank God you became a pop star.
Absolutely, it was the only option.
There was
really.
no choice.
But you're doing really, really well. You have done, and you continue to, don't you?
Thank you.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, recently we were talking about the Bowie exhibition.
Yes.
You had the Silver Duke
Yes.
in there, didn't you?
Yeah.
And that completely sold out, didn't it?
Yeah, that was amazing, actually. Yeah, I was very pleased at that because it's kind of strange the way things like that happen because we keep going on about we've got this Bowie connection thing because we were both kind of inspired by that initially. So it was amazing to actually officially be involved in the big Bowie exhibition, creating some art for it at the V&A. So yeah, that was something I was. You know.
So how often do your paths cross then? Are you on the phone all of the time going, creative meeting or?
We've known each other for years. I've collected a lot of his work over the years, and he's done, you know, sleeves for me, and he's done, you know, stuff for Culture Club, and you know, he's just part of my kind of life really. And we don't talk every day, but we have similar aesthetics, I think, and that sort of kept us, you know, kind of in contact with each other, you know.
Yeah, we kind of almost, like when we're working together, we're both singing from the same sort of sheet, so we'll kind of know exactly what the other one kind of means by something. So we can kind of almost, it's not really telepathic, but it kind of just works that what our aesthetics are very similar, so it finds it easier to work with each other.
I might come up with like a phrase. I come up with this, never mind the Botox.
Brilliant, that's absolutely brilliant.
And then Mark kind of made it into a painting and, you know, kind of made it realised. And then
But we were on the phone and George was saying, like, add a bit of this and add a bit there. And it was almost like kind of painting down the telephone, creating this piece. So it was really a pure collaboration.
What's the quote? I was at the exhibition today and I had to write it down. Men are the women of the 21st century.
Oh, yes. Well...
Is that one of yours?
Yes. That is a comment. It's really about the media, and it's about how, as you remember, when we were kids, it was all advertising was glamorous women and Miss World type people.
Never saw a male bottom.
You never saw a male body.
No, you didn't.
And actually, what's
It's all
happened?
quite erotic now, isn't it? That
Yeah,
men and...
We'd have to go to Grattan's catalogue and look at the sort of underwear section.
And now you can go to H&M and look at David Beckham.
No, it was literally, my mum's catalogue would come and I would be like, wait till she'd had a look through it, and then I'd kind of off I'd go, and they were quite dull when you compare them to...
String vests.
No, but when you compare them to what you get now, you know, it's full on, you know, 3-course lunch, but then it was like quite plain, and I used to really sneak off. I think a lot of gay boys did in the 70s, you know.
Everybody did.
Very exciting, you know.
But, you know, you see a bus go past now, and it's like, you know, it's all men, men, men. It's car adverts, everything. There's people diving into swimming pools. And so that slogan was a comment on the way that, and also about the grooming thing. I mean, men never used to sort of groom themselves or whatever. So it's kind of all flipped around. And that's...
Yeah, you can go to a department store and there's like hundreds of products for men. I mean, it's great, you know.
So it's just a...
I think my microphone's gone off.
Oh, no.
Talk very loudly. If anybody can help and switch this thing back on, I'd be very grateful. So obviously that's much better for you in that things have progressed. See if that works.
Oh, yes, totally. I mean, as I said, the world's a very different place now, you know, from when we were growing up. You know...
It's all right, Josh. Can you hear me? Yeah, all right. Voice like a frog. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, I was just saying, you know, the world's a very different place now, so it is amazing how things have changed.
In terms of George, it must have been, how was it for you when you could see him getting a bit lost at some point? What was it like?
Oh, he was getting lost as well.
We all got lost.
Yeah. Both lost.
Yeah,
I'm
it was.
afraid he can't represent himself as the sane version. Although I won't, you know.
No,
out
I
in
think
public,
it was that sort of time. We'd all gone through the club kind of period, and things all got a bit heavy, and it happened to a lot of people at that particular time. So I can't really say that I was observing what was happening with George. You know, obviously you'd see headlines and things like that, but you know that a lot of that is kind of rubbish and sensationalism anyway. So I didn't really have a kind of
Moral
strong
tone.
Moral tone. Yeah, I didn't really have a moral tone.
You raised an eyebrow.
Yeah.
You know.
Did you visit him in prison?
No.
No, I didn't. But we did send you a card, didn't we? Me and
did,
Betty
yeah.
Valentino, I think.
Yeah,
No, because I was very drunk when I wrote it. In fact, I'm only told that we sent it. I can't even remember sending it. So that's kind of a snapshot of what we were talking
but
about.
you can't just have who you want turning up, you know.
Oh, I just thought you felt
No. No, it's a right palaver.
Really?
So you're very selective, yeah. You'd never have got in.
I wasn't on the list.
Well, I must ask you, what was it like being in there those 4 months?
Quite boring,
Yeah.
quite boring. And
Did they give you jobs to do?
yeah, I worked in the kitchen. It's been quite well documented. I worked in the kitchen for about 3 months. And, you know, it's kind of like a microcosm of what it's like out here. It's exactly the same as outside, but, you know, you just got lots of people cramped up together and, you know, not much time to yourself. But it's no different from really real life, really. You just can't go out when you want to.
Because we were only looking at a magazine before. On his last day on Earth, you'd like to have sex with the rugby team in the Cotswolds. And cook Italian food. I don't know whether you can do that at the same time. But what were you thinking of when you were in there as, you know, what am I going to do when I get out?
Well, when you're in a situation like that, you're not really thinking about anything but sort of day-to-day things. But, you know, I'd already been sober for a year before I went to prison, so I was in a pretty good space anyway. And I was always kind of planning my my rise back again. I mean, I'd kind of, you know, it was just unfortunate that it happened, but I was kind of, I was ready to kind of, get on with my life, really. And that's what I've done. And it almost feels like it didn't happen. You know, it really just feels like, I know it happened, of course, but it just doesn't feel real. It's really strange. But I think that's true of a lot of things in my life. You know, if I look back at my kind of career in the 80s, yes, I kind of remember it, but it just feels a bit mythical. You know, I don't really feel like I have any relation at all to that person, at all. You know, I see old interviews and I just think, what are you going on about? You know, I was actually with Anthony Hegarty about 3 weeks ago in New York, and he had this interview of me from the Record Mirror. I wasn't even famous. It was just like one of the first interviews I'd ever done. And I was reading it and I was like, oh my God, what were you going on about? I was saying things like, Iron Maiden are going to be the biggest band in the world. I said, the Pope is like Gary Glitter. And just unbelievable rambling. I mean, it really made me laugh. And I was thinking, I'm so glad I'm not like that now. You know, I tend to kind of take a breath now before I say things. But, that's what it was like then. You just rambled on. And people, when you first become famous, you're just some normal person who happens to become famous, and suddenly people are asking you ridiculous things about world affairs and what do you think of this and what do you think of that, and you just rattle stuff off, There
were so many publications as well, though, weren't there, when you think about it?
There were, and we were so desperate to get in all of them, we'd almost do anything, say anything to get in them,
Whereas now, bits online if people want to find sources, but then you had all of the newspapers, and the tabloids were particularly after, I mean, they still are, but then it seemed to be quite mad. You had your smash hits, your number one, your Record Mirror, your Sound, your Melody Maker.
I think it was more, sorry, I think it was more focused because you had the kind of big, 3 or 4 big newspapers. But I think in some ways it's kind of worse now because I think the hunger for gossip is relentless because there's so many bloggers and websites and people that want to be Perez Hilton and so many people.
And mobile phones taking photographs all of the time.
Absolutely, and everybody now, whereas back in the old days we'd watch Top of the Pops or whatever, or watch someone on TV and kind of slag them off in their living room. Now people do it online, so they just feel obliged to say whatever they think in print, and it's quite fascinating, and you've got things like Twitter and Facebook where people literally go out of their way to kind of tell you the most unbelievable things. But I think it's worse now. I think, back in the day, you kind of knew what kind of animal it was. The Fleet Street was a certain type of animal, and it was kind of controllable to a certain degree, I think.
You're nodding.
Yeah, no, I think George is right. I think it's now completely out of control, and some of the things that people can say on Twitter and all these things, are way beyond what any of the tabloids would ever have done. So yeah, I agree actually.
But you have a block button. This is the great thing on Twitter. When people say, "Oh, I've been hounded by trolls," I'm like, why? You just block them. It takes 2 seconds to get rid of them, and all their tweets go with them into the ether. It's great. I mean, you just send them a bitchy comment, block them, and there they go. And they're left with your great, smart reply to them, and off they go.
Now we're going to take some questions from you in just a moment, but I have to ask you, because you have been talking to Roy in America, and also I read today that you have been talking to Nile Rodgers. I mean, presumably you've been talking to lots of other people as well. Everybody's excited about the idea Culture Club are going to go in the studio and record.
Yeah, well, we've been talking about it for 3 years, and we have done writing, and we've
Snappy decision then.
No, it's not been a snappy decision at all. As anyone will know that's been in a band, it's not an easy thing to get back together. There's all the kind of, personal stuff and la la la. But anyway, I think, and I do question quite a lot why do I want to do this, but I kind of want to do it. I think it would be good fun. I want to do a new record with them, and we're going to start writing in January, and we'll see what happens. And yeah, Nile Rodgers is someone that would be great to work with. Not because we want to make a funky record, but I think he's a really great band producer. He's done some of my favorite records. So it wouldn't be like that we wanted to kind of make a funk record or anything like that. I actually don't really like the kind of blue-eyed soul tag at all. So I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know what the record will be like, but hopefully it'll be good.
And everybody else in the band obviously up for it. You've all been talking.
Yeah. I mean, they're up for it. I'm the one that kind of approached them, and they were like really shocked. Like, really? I was like, yeah, I think it would be a really good time to do it.
And everything is sort of history. It's all sorted now. You can just move on.
You know what? It is. It's really, it's like a new phase in our lives, and I mean, people don't really change. I don't think people really essentially change. I think people are always who they are. We never hated each other. It was never kind of like Fleetwood Mac or anything. We fell out, but we always got over it.
Okay, your turn. Can we have some lights on, please?
No, spotlight.
Or can you wave your hands around a lot? So there's somebody right over there. Yes, you. About 3 from the back.
That question time.
You've just put your hand down. Yes, you. Stand up and shout it out if you would, please. Oh, no, it's the man behind you. But never mind, you're fine.
Please, no, I'm not releasing a DVD or anything like that. But if you follow me on Twitter, I tweet a lot of food tweets, and they seem to really rattle people. It's funny how food really bugs people. If you put up, like, I've eaten, like, some sauerkraut, people go, eat a burger, kill a cow. They get very passionate about it. And actually, I always say to people, I'm not telling you what to eat. I'm just, you might be one of those people that, likes alternative food, and you might not know about this product. And so I feel obliged to kind of tell you about it. But basically, it's all the stuff we all know. We all know that chocolate brownies are not going to make us thin. We all know that. So it's all the basic stuff that Jamie Oliver tells you. Eat less, eat healthy things, walk about a bit more, and don't eat after 9 o'clock. All of that stuff is kind of what I've done in the past 5 years. And I also went on this thing called the Metabolic Plan. And one of the most important things, it's the only thing that really works, is you have 3 meals a day and you do not eat between meals at all. You don't have any coffee or tea. You only have water or fizzy water. So it's like a mini fast. And if you do that, even if you're eating kind of, not the best stuff in the world, you will actually probably lose quite a lot of weight. But it's basically healthy food.
And do you go to the gym?
Yes, I do. I was up this morning at 7 o'clock
Is
being
that
tortured.
why you phoned me at 20 to 8?
I did, yes. I mean, obviously, exercise is also a big part of it. You can't just, eat what you like and not exercise. So, yeah, I've got a trainer who comes and tortures me, and it's fabulous.
There was a gentleman behind you, and then I'll come to you. Do you still want to ask a question? No? All right, you, if you don't mind. Sorry, some high heels went through. What was that?
It's such a weird question. It's a good question. It's I mean, well, fame is something that people kind of inflict upon you in a funny sort of way. You're only famous if other people think you are. And you see a lot of that now with reality stars. Somebody, because someone's been on telly, people say, oh, yeah, they're famous, And obviously, when I was growing up, it meant something very different. It means different things now. But when I was a kid, I suppose we always used to think you have to be really fabulous and, and you have to do something, you have to be able to play guitar or sing or whatever. But it's very difficult to say what it feels like to be famous. It just means that loads of people know who you are, and often people kind of have real assumptions about what you are, and they base a lot they base a lot of their opinions on what they read and fictional stuff.
Sorry.
She's a character. But it's really difficult to say, it's just, because I've the last kind of 2 years, last 2 or 3 years have been really interesting for me because I lost weight and I grew a beard and I became quite unrecognizable. So I've been going on the tube or walking around and it's been amazing and no one knows who the fuck I am. It's great. Starting, because I've got the album out, people are starting to say, oh, he's got a beard. But generally, I was in America for 6 weeks, just like 2 weeks ago. I didn't get stopped once the whole time I was there. It was great. It was just really good. So, there's a downside to fame, obviously, because you can't just go to Waitrose and do your shopping without people going, excuse me, can I take a picture? And I'm quite grumpy, sometimes. But it's also amazing. It's also amazing to do what you love and, to kind of be able to make a living out of it. And that's, there's all sorts of things that are funny and great and awful about it. It's everything.
Thank you.
It's everything, darling. It's sushi, it's noodles, it's all of that.
I'm sure you must have been asked, actually, because that just prompted me. I'm sure you must have been asked to do things like Strictly Ballroom or Dancing on
Every
Ice.
year.
Or I'm in the Jungle, Get Me Out. Yeah, really?
Every year the money goes up. But unfortunately, lycra, tucked in shirt, it's not going to work for me. I think you have to be really brave to put those clothes on. Strictly Come Dancing. And also, I can't dance, I can't dance like that.
The Jungle. Right, yes, you.
You talked a little bit about the importance of visibility, like LGBT people, and helping people promote and change genders and stuff. Do you think that ultimately social media will help the progression of LGBT rights, or do you think it'll just do us all completely?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because in some ways the world is better, depending on where you are, depending on where you live. In most of the big cities, you're pretty okay. But I think there are always going to be places where, people are threatened by anything that they don't understand. And I think sexuality, homophobia, I always say homophobia is a form of self-loathing because, it's a big projection. I don't understand anyone who obsesses over what someone else does in their bedroom. I've got no problem with anyone doing whatever they do, but I don't spend any time thinking about all straight people, what they get up to. It doesn't bother me. It's just, and so I always think like someone that's obsessed with what I do in my bed, well, why are you thinking about it so much, So I think a lot of it's kind of tied into, personally, without being too controversial, I think we're all everything. I think human beings are sexual beings. and we are all everything, and we all decide at a certain point what we prefer. But I think the terror lies in that kind of unknowingness in sexuality, and I think a lot of kids at school, when they're reaching puberty and they get that panic about, I might fancy other boys or whatever, and that's what it's about. It's just about fear, but unfortunately, having that kind of rationale doesn't help when you get your teeth kicked in. Saying, oh, well, it's a projection. It's like, what could you do about that? I mean, I just think, it's important for people in the public eye who are gay to kind of talk about it, to confront these things. I just feel like there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Things like in Russia, Africa, it's never going to go away. I think it will always be an issue, and I'm just grateful that there are more people who are cool, and I just find in my life, I don't encounter much of it. You know what I mean? I don't encounter much of it. Occasionally, I hear someone say, "Batty boy," I'm like, yeah, absolutely, you got me. But I'm surprised, even on things like Twitter, I'm surprised that people aren't more nasty. I'm surprised that people aren't more aggressive. I'm shocked that, because you hear all these stories. And I don't know, I think a lot of it is what you put out there. I always say to people, when people ask me about these things, I always say, you got to start by really loving yourself, owning what you are. Whatever it is you are, not to think that you're better than anyone or worse than anyone, but, just accept whatever life's dealt you, whatever it's a sexuality, whatever. And I think if you start from that point of loving yourself and kind of feeling secure, that is a huge, powerful message, And I think it's a really good starting point. So, start with kind of self-worth, I think, is really important.
Yes, that lady there. Come to you in a moment.
Oh, God, I get these questions. That's a really difficult question to answer. If I had to remember. I don't know, I think I'd quite like it if people said, he was true to himself. That's a nice thing.
Right, the person right behind the bar. Yeah, you.
This is the both of you. Do you think there'd ever be a club like Trade or Kinky Galinkies again?
Well, Trade's still going, actually. I just did some artwork for him last week.
I think for younger people, there are clubs. I'm hearing about things over in like Dalston, which I've never been to, but I'm hearing about places like, there's these great clubs. So I think, for me, when I go clubbing now, it's usually because I'm working in a club. I don't really go clubbing unless I'm actually DJing. It doesn't really interest me. I love DJing and I love being involved in the music side of it. But just to hang out in a club, I don't know if it would be as exciting as it was back then. I was a bit younger and Trade was really fun, but
I think the nature of clubbing's changed a bit, hasn't it? It's more of a business now, really. I mean, when Kinky Galinky and Trade were really in their heyday, it wasn't being done, obviously money was being made, but it wasn't being done as a big money-making branded thing. And I think a lot of it now it's become just another offshoot of the entertainment industry, really.
Yeah, which you really have in DJing, especially in America, you've got this, what they call EDM, which is, all dance music is EDM, electronic dance music, but you've got this sound, which is, filling stadiums, it's big money, it's a big kind of thing now in America.
Yeah, it's a shame really, isn't it? Because the excitement of going to those. I mean, I used to say myself, the ones I went to, like adult youth clubs, they weren't like a youth club, we weren't playing ping pong or anything.
Well, there are still good clubs, there's loads of good clubs, there's loads of good clubs all over the country. I play in them all the time, but they're small.
Yeah.
They're small clubs like Venus and Manchester, there's clubs in but the clubs are getting smaller. And I think actually, I was asked this question today because I'm doing a gig in a couple of weeks in this bar in Soho, and I was like called up by this gay mag. You're doing the Rupert Street bar like it's some big, event. I was like, well, it's a club, I think in the future, real clubbing will get smaller, because the big DJs, they charge too much and you can't afford, clubs can't afford them. So things are going to change, and there's always good things being done, and there's always great music being made. You know, it's just whether you're really excited by it. You know what I mean? You have to sometimes go out and find things now. I think that's what you have to do these days. You can't just kind of rely on things to kind of fall in your lap. You've got to give a shit and get excited and
society's changed as well.
jump
I mean,
right in. You know, put your face in the cake of life and go.
Yeah, when Kinky Galinky was kind of going, there weren't so many people on the same wavelength. It was more of a smaller circle, and now everything's become so kind of big that I think that's why people have the perception that it's lost something. It's just because it's grown in size, I think, really.
But also it's an age thing as well. I mean, I think, you know, I'm always wary of kind of, you know, making comments about popular culture because it always sounds like you're saying, oh, in my day. I'm always more excited about what's going on now. Now is much more exciting to me than anything else in the past or, you know, all the past stuff is great to reference, but actually who cares about it? It's what's going on now that's really exciting. That's what you've got to get involved in, you know.
Totally agree. That lady there, please. Yeah. Yes, you.
I'd just like to ask you, George, you know when you were in the grips of addiction, when you were in the grips of addiction with heroin, how did it feel to actually have that exposed in the media, because it's such a personal thing, and did that impact on your drug use and your subsequent recovery?
The best way to describe it, I don't want to give you a headline. You know what? Obviously, you know, being in the public eye, you know, it's never helpful if you've got a problem and it's splashed all over the newspaper. I have to say that, you know, people are actually very nice. You know, when you're going through shit in your life and you think, oh, something's in the newspaper, you think, I really don't want to go out in the street because someone's going to make a comment. And actually, people are surprisingly fantastic. You know, people are actually quite gentle with you. It's quite interesting how you get terrified. You read these things, you think, oh, God, I'm going to stay in for the next 6 months, and hopefully people will forget about it. But you can't do that. You have to get on with your life. And I'm actually always amazed at how nice people are. You know, they're just very supportive, you know. And obviously for any addict, you know, having, you know, your business plastered all over the paper doesn't necessarily help. No, it's not a helpful thing at all. But I'm almost 6 years clean now, so, you know, I am... I don't have to worry about that anymore. I've done the tour, worn the T-shirt, really. I've taken it to, for me, you know, being sober is the most amazing thing ever. Thank you.
Right, who else? Yes, here, please.
Hello.
You mentioned the neo-naturists before, and I was wondering, you mentioned the neo-naturists before.
Oh, yeah. You know them?
Well, yes, I was wondering, Grace and Perry talks about you a bit, and the in the squat, and I was wondering if you could just talk about...
Well, obviously, I remember Grace and Perry living in our squat towards the end of my staying there, but I didn't really take much notice of him, actually. He was the boyfriend of, I think, Jennifer Binney. Well, I was friends with Christine Binney, and I remember that they moved in towards the sort of end when a lot of people had moved out. And I do wish I'd kind of taken more notice of Grayson because I'm actually a big fan of what he does. I've got a vase. I think he's a genius. I mean, I absolutely think he's a genius and really love his work. And kind of, you know, when I realized who he was, I was like, wow, you know. But this very similar thing happened with Tracy Emin. I used to know Tracy Emin from Margate. And I had a very funny encounter with her. I was at a Bowie gig and she was backstage. I was like, all right, Tracy, how are you? And I was chatting away. And then I noticed that she was with like the Chapman brothers and this one and that one, and there were loads of artists there. And it suddenly dawned on me that she was actually Tracy Emin, and I was actually quite surprised. Wish I'd been nicer to her in Margate. But yeah, no, I think Grayson's amazing, but I didn't really know him. I remember seeing him, you know, and this was pre him becoming a successful artist, but I think he's a brilliant artist. I love his work. It's so good.
There was somebody else. Yeah, two here. That one, and then you.
I'd just like to ask Mark what work he's planning on working on next and where this leads you to.
Well, we're planning on continuing to work together on a collaboration and do some more stuff. Yeah. So we're going to be doing some more joint stuff. I'm working on a couple of commissions at the moment, and possibly an exhibition for London next year or the year after. So yeah, just carrying on really, and just work.
Painting the world into a more beautiful place.
Right, yes,
Also, I'd like to jump out of an airplane, but it will never happen. I'd love to be able to do that, but it's never going to happen. Yeah, I mean, I love what I do. I mean, I've tried a bit of acting. I'm not very good at acting. It's very hard work. You have to really work hard to be an actor. So I don't know. But you know what? I'm open to anything. If it sounds exciting at the time, I'll give it a go within reason. I mean, there's certain things I'm not interested in. I'm not interested in potholing or going into the jungle, anything like that, eating cockroaches.
Why do people do potholing?
But, I'm not interested in kind of anything like, I'm not a daredevil. I'm not interested in anything kind of terrifying or... Sorry? Oh, there's loads of people I'd love to. Yeah, I'd love to. Debbie Harry's would be someone. Bowie would be someone. Tony Visconti would be someone I'd love to work with. I'd love to make a record with him.
That'd be great if you could get Tony Visconti and Bowie in the studio for the next Culture Club album.
That's never going to happen. But, I mean, I did actually accidentally work with Tony Visconti last year. I did a Mark Bolan thing at the in London, and he was there doing the strings, and that was amazing. Such a talented bloke. I'm actually reading his book at the moment. It's brilliant.
He's amazing. Time for one more. Yes, you.
I use a Canon Mark II, but I'm about to buy myself a Mark III, which is the best camera. But I've got lots of kind of old-fashioned cameras, Polaroids and things. But yeah, the Canon Mark II is the one that I use at the moment, and I love it. Absolutely love it. It's quite bulky, but it's but the 3 is, I don't know if you've used it, it's amazing. A friend of mine actually just bought one, and I've been borrowing that, and it's just amazing. But the problem with cameras is then next year an even better one's going to come out, so it's kind of like, you have to be careful when you choose to buy them, but I love it. I love digital, working with a digital camera. It's and I also work with an amazing retoucher called Dean Stockings, who's also a photographer, who's a big part of what I do. So give him a little credit, because my pictures wouldn't be half as exciting without Dean.
Actually, I should warm my glasses. We've got time for one more question. Lady in the balcony. And then you two.
I've chosen a group for the last 30 years, and I've only ever seen the good. And I've seen, I don't know whether you call it reinvent yourself, but I've watched you change through the years. And I just want to know who gave you vision, who's your mentor, who's the person you go to and have those conversations to get your mind back on track.
So many people have kind of played a role in kind of influencing me. I mean, I've got a friend who's called Fat Tony. He's quite a legendary. He's not really fat, but he was quite instrumental in kind of helping me get sober. But you have to do these things yourself. There's nobody that can do it. When you're in crisis, the only person that can pull you out of it is yourself. Ultimately, so really, I kind of, that's something I did myself, and I read a lot. I'm very into this writer Eckhart Tolle, who's a German kind of spiritual, sort of writer who wrote this great book called The Power of Now, which has had a massive effect on me as a person. But I think reading is really, really important. I read a lot, and I read a lot of kind of, I wouldn't say self-help books, but I read books, spiritual books, and I practice Buddhism. That's been really helpful in kind of, focusing my mind on a kind of more positive outlook to life, yeah.
And the lady down here next to the pillar. Yeah, to you, yeah. The main influences for your style.
My style? I mean, people probably think I spend a lot more time thinking about how I look than I do. I mean, it's kind of, just like, for example, a lot of people have been quite upset about me having a beard, which I love. I love the fact that it pisses people off. I mean, who cares? But, you know, it's just one of those things. I just kind of forgot to shave for a few days and thought, it's quite nice, actually. And then I sort of, you know, decided to grow it. But, I mean, you know, I don't really spend that much time thinking about it. You know, it's kind of, you know, it just happens. I mean, I'm just kind of naturally drawn to kind of interesting things and certain clothing and certain hats. And, you know, I'm kind of like you know, I love a thrift store, and I like to kind of mix, you know, odd things with, you know, maybe things that are expensive, you know, but I always trying to do things that feel comfortable. You know, it's more about not really worried about fashion as much. It's more a personal style thing. You know, I kind of try to do things that are individual, you know, because fashion really is about wearing money. You know, big fashion is about, look how much my handbag costs, look how much my jacket costs, which can be nice. That's also nice. I mean, there are some beautiful, beautiful designer things in the world. But, yeah, I mean, I just try and do my own thing, really.
And what do you do with it all? What do you do with it all when you've finished with it?
I recycle a lot of it. I kind of give a lot of it to kind of charity shops. I never, ever say it's mine. I kind of take it to like a far-flung charity shop in the middle of nowhere. And I have actually seen people in my things, which is brilliant. I've actually been out and I thought, that's my jacket. And I like the idea. I don't like the idea of anyone knowing it's my stuff. You know, I'd rather chop it up and give it to, I don't know, the idea of, you know what I mean? I like the idea of it just sort of going into an Oxfam shop in sort of Sid Cup, you know, people buying it for nothing, you know. And I buy a lot of stuff in Oxfam shops and thrift shops and, you know, kind of, you know, I still do that. I still can't stop myself. I've got friends who are really disgusted by it. The idea of going into a charity shop repulses them, but I can't help it. It's like a magnetic field that just pulls me in the door. I could spend days in Oxfam shops and charity shops, although they're very expensive these days. They're like boutiques.
They are, aren't they? Shot up.
It's vintage now, isn't it? It's
Yes,
been
everything's
rebranded.
vintage.
It's not charity.
Well, that's just about it, actually, because we have to finish by 20%. Well, oh, go on.
Go on.
Can you give us a vision of how you think you're going to look in 20 years' time?
Old. I hope I'm here in 20 years' time. I will be very happy to be here. You know what? I think, you know, you're going to get old, and I'm really glad that I'm getting old because that means I'm still here. I'm not brave enough to kind of have surgery or anything like that. I'm too much of a coward. And also, it's so unpredictable. And you generally end up with the same face as everybody else who's had surgery, which is not, you know. When they devise a form of surgery that's really convincing and just subtle, I'll maybe think about it. But, you know, I think if you eat kind of healthy and you have a kind of positive outlook, you know, I mean, if people want to do it, I don't have a problem with it, but it's not something that really appeals to me. I don't want to end up with the same face as everybody else in Soho. No, but you know what I mean? It's like, there's, you know, when people have nose jobs, there's only one nose you can have. There's not like loads of noses. There's just this one look. It's kind of snub, ski, slope nose. And the mouth thing, I think it's always dangerous when people start playing around with their mouths. Because I think your lips, you know, God gave you those for a reason, you know, and they're big part of your expression. And you end up kind of, you know, it only works on some people. Well, I think it works on Pete Burns, I think it works on Amanda Lepore, but not on anyone else.
Was there anybody else there? I thought I saw another hand there. Yes, you.
She's okay, yeah. She fell over at my gig, and she is there, but she's all right. Yeah, she was a bit shaken up, but she's good. Aww. She's good.
One more there.
Pretty much the same, actually. I mean, you know, I was asked recently to choose 10 tracks. Usually it's kind of a lot of 70s stuff. There'll always be a Bowie track in there. There'll always probably be a T-Rex track in there. There'll always be a Joni Mitchell track in there. Dylan, Leonard Cohen, Nico. You know, yeah, it's always kind of 70s, 60s, 70s, and then, you know, like these days, I love that band, the Orwells. I thought they were fantastic. I like a bit of rock and roll drama. I remember the first time I ever saw Suede on Top of the Pops. I just thought it was the most exciting thing. You know, I always really wanted to be in a rock band. That was always my dream. It didn't kind of pan out, but I always liked guitar bands. You know, I always kind of like those sorts of bands, and you know, that's, you know, because I suppose growing up in the 70s, you know, with kind of glam rock and T-Rex and all those things, I've always kind of loved my guitar music. So, you know, but yeah, Joni, Dylan, Bowie, Bolan, Shirley Bassey.
We actually sang Shirley Bassey earlier, didn't we?
We did.
We did Kiss Me, Honey, Honey, Kiss Me for a sound check. That's it. Thank you so much for coming along. And of course, can we just thank the wonderful Trademark, and don't forget the exhibition is at the Camp and Furnace alongside George's work as well, and show your appreciation as well for the fantastic Boy George.
Holly Johnson.
Holly Johnson.
You don't even have to do anything and you get an applause.
Thank you so much for coming along, and have
Thank
a
you.
safe journey home. All right, you take care of yourselves, and good to see you all. Night night.